You are listening to Jason Bolzano's article, Trump's Tariff Wars. How is it shaping the global economy? U.S. President Donald Trump signed the executive order that everyone's been waiting for, and now there's a global trade war. The new rules are set to take effect on Tuesday and will make it harder for U.S. trade with its neighbors, Canada and Mexico, and China. This is going to add to the already heavy global tension. Stocks and economies around the world are expected to see some big changes on Monday. Mexico, Canada, and China are the three biggest trading partners of the U.S., so there's a lot of uncertainty. Mexico and Canada have said they'll retaliate, and China is probably going to do the same. China is already complaining to the International Trade Organization. Economists and businessmen in 4 countries, including the U.S., are pretty worried. They say, this is going to be a mess, everyone is going to suffer. We're all waiting and watching to see what happens. Trump put a 25% tariff on all goods from Canada and Mexico. Usually, there's a customs union between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. Or, not a customs union, but these countries have free trade. Goods from these countries can move between each other freely. Trump made an exception for Canada's energy and oil exports, and announced a 10% tariff on oil and energy products instead of 25%. He also slapped tariffs on Chinese goods, which were already subject to tariffs, so this was just another tax. These new tariffs will go into effect just after midnight on Tuesday and will be added on top of the existing tariffs. So, imported goods entering the U.S. from these countries will be taxed 25% or more of their value, meaning that prices will rise. More than 40% of U.S. imports come from Mexico, China, and Canada, so there will probably be price increases on most products sold in the U.S., which means higher prices for American consumers. These tariffs are a big blow to the relationship between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, which have been trading freely for decades. The economies of the 3 countries functioned almost as one. Trump has suddenly imposed tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods, in violation of international rules and bilateral agreements. It's like a country building a tariff wall on a region within itself. Let's explain it like this, for example. The most popular beer brand currently sold in the U.S. is Modelo Special, which is made in Mexico. Modelo's just been hit with a 25% tariff because it's a Mexican product, and it's likely that sales of this Mexican beer in the U.S. will drop sharply due to the price increase, but Modelo, which looks like Mexican beer on the outside, is made from barley produced in the U.S. You know barley? Mexico buys a quarter of the United States barley exports and uses almost all of that American barley for beer production. So if Mexican beer sales drop in the U.S., Mexico's barley imports from the U.S. will drop too. This is just one example of how these economies are closely linked. The economies of the U.S., Mexico, and Canada are pretty much one big economy for most products. A lot of car companies have factories in Mexico, and most of the car parts come from there. Sometimes, raw materials are shipped from the U.S., processed in Mexico, and then sold back to the U.S. as a processed or semi-processed product. In the U.S., these products are put into a device or incorporated into a machine or another product, and then sold back to Mexico. In Mexico, it's packaged and shipped back to the U.S. Some products go back and forth like this 4 to 5 times between Mexico and the U.S. In the end, the final product can be cheaper and more affordable than producing it in the U.S. or only in Mexico. You can say the same about the relationship between Canada and the U.S. and Canada and Mexico. The imposition of tariffs on such intertwined economies has confused and confounded everything. Trump's imposing tariffs on Mexico and Canada is just adding to the chaos. But it's clear that in many sectors, these tariffs will also hit American producers and farmers. Trump also has a hard time explaining why he imposed these tariffs. Sometimes he says, China, Mexico, and Canada are robbing the U.S. They have a huge trade deficit against the U.S., so I'm imposing tariffs. Other times, he's talking about the drugs coming into the country from those countries. We have to stop it. He says a lot of Americans are dying every day because of it. He also says that we have a lot of illegal immigrants coming into the U.S. through the Canadian and Mexican borders, including illegal asylum seekers. We have to slow it down, they have to stop it. That's why we're imposing tariffs. Trump was right, there's a trade deficit between the U.S. and these countries. We should also mention the European Union. The trade deficit between Europe, Mexico, Canada, China, and the United States is hundreds of billions of dollars, more like $1 trillion. But mixing economic relations with non-economic issues like drugs and illegal immigration is just bizarre. It doesn't make sense to put a ton of restrictions on the economy just because you can't control your borders. And there's no evidence that these countries are really encouraging drug trafficking or illegal immigration. Trump said he'll keep imposing tariffs until the flow of illegal immigrants and illegal fentanyl into the U.S. is reduced. But his administration hasn't said what else would be needed to lift the tariffs. So, if we see a dip in illegal crossings, will the U.S. consider lifting the tariffs? Or what level of fentanyl smuggling into the U.S. would Trump lift the tariffs? This isn't clear. Meanwhile, Mexico and Canada have taken some steps to try and reduce illegal border crossings. They've been ramping up these measures over the last few months. Crossings at the U.S.-Mexico border are at their lowest level since 2002. But both drug and migrant smuggling are still way higher than during Trump's first term. Back in December, Mexico did their biggest fentanyl bust yet, seizing a ton of the stuff. They're doing special operations on the Mexican side to cut down on fentanyl smuggling into the U.S. Canada has sent extra drones, helicopters, and law enforcement officers to the U.S. border to help secure it. There hasn't been any news recently about the Chinese government taking any extra steps beyond working with the U.S. on law enforcement in the fentanyl trade. Trump called Chinese President Xi Jinping in his first week in office and raised the issue of fentanyl on the phone. But China hasn't said anything about it until today. Trump's weeks of tariff threats have given Canada, Mexico, and China time to think about how to retaliate with their own tariffs. Canada said they'd put tariffs on orange juice from Florida, Tennessee whiskey, and Kentucky peanut butter. They picked these products for specific reasons. It's like they're saying to Republican senators and voters in key states who voted for Trump in 2024, if you mess with us, we'll mess with you. But Trump saw the rest and called arrest. When the tariffs were announced, Canada was reluctantly forced to take a broader retaliatory decision. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Canada would impose 25% tariffs on $107 billion worth of imports from the U.S. in retaliation for the tariffs imposed by U.S. President Trump. 1/5 of these tariffs will take effect on Tuesday, with the rest to be implemented within 21 days. The tariffs will cover things like alcohol, fruit juice, vegetables, perfume, shoes, clothing, household appliances, furniture, sporting goods, lumber, and plastics. As part of our response, we're also thinking about a range of non-tariff measures, some related to critical minerals, energy supplies, and other partnerships, Trudeau said, emphasizing that they'll stand strong for Canada. So, Canada's not just going to slap tariffs on goods from the U.S., they're planning to do more to limit the flow of American products into their own market. The bottom line is that Canada doesn't want to make things easier for U.S. citizens. The Canadian government is telling the Americans that Trump's actions are crazy. In a message to Americans, Prime Minister Trudeau said, tariffs on Canada will put your jobs at risk, potentially shutting down American auto assembly plants and other manufacturing facilities. They'll end up paying more for stuff, like groceries and gas. Trudeau's trying to appeal to Americans' wallets. He also tried to appeal to Americans' hearts. He said that Canada and America are two of the most successful economic and military partners the world has ever seen. He added that if Trump wants to make America great again, he shouldn't punish Canada, but improve the relationship between the two countries. He also shot down Trump's claims about illegal drugs and immigration, saying that only a tiny fraction of the fentanyl and illegal crossings into the U.S. pass through Canada. However, it should be noted that not all individuals in Canada embody the same level of decorum as Prime Minister Trudeau. At the commencement of a hockey game between the Ottawa Senators and the Minnesota Wild, the United States national anthem was met with disapproval by the spectators. The repeated outbursts of President Trump have led to a decline in public sympathy for the United States within Canada. It is unclear whether Trump is cognizant of the fact that his actions are deeply offensive to America's closest ally. Moreover, the situation on the U.S.-Mexico border remains a point of concern. Mexico has declared its intention to impose retaliatory tariffs on American goods. This decision was made by Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. She also angrily rejected Trump's accusation on Saturday that Mexico had formed an intolerable alliance with drug cartels. Trump has indicated his intention to launch a major offensive against them. However, it is important to note that these cartels are operating within Mexican territory, which is likely to exacerbate the already strained relationship between the United States and Mexico. Trump has accused the Mexican government of collaborating with these cartels, suggesting a mutual conspiracy between the two nations. This behavior is a clear indication of Trump's testing of Mexico's patience. It appears that Trump's approach is not aligned with a desire to collaborate with Mexico, but rather, it suggests a willingness to sever all ties. Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, published the following statement on the social media platform X: "We categorically repudiate the White House's calumny against the Mexican government concerning an alleged alliance with criminal entities. If such an alliance exists, it is evident in the nexus between American arms dealers and Mexican criminal organizations, which are equipped with advanced and powerful weaponry." President Sheinbaum of Mexico: "Sir, at this juncture, I would like to recommend a film. The 2017 film American Made, starring Tom Cruise, also known as Barry Seal, is a prime example of this phenomenon. The Smuggler. I strongly encourage you to watch this film. The film is based on a true life story, and Tom Cruise portrays the character of Barry Seal, a former TWA pilot who engaged in illicit activities with the CIA and drug cartels. As previously mentioned, the film is based on actual events, and viewing it will likely broaden one's perspective. The film provides concrete, realistic information about the relationship between the United States and Latin America, as well as the role of drug cartels. It is noteworthy that the film is of American origin. For these reasons, I strongly recommend its viewing." President Sheinbaum of Mexico: "If the U.S. government and its institutions genuinely aspired to curtail the substantial consumption of fentanyl within their borders, they could readily impede the illicit drug trade in major American cities and the associated money laundering activities that inflict considerable harm upon their population." This assertion by the Mexican president suggests a potential strategy for addressing the issue. In the United States, the ease with which these substances can be sold is a matter of concern, with their availability on the streets and the financial gain Americans are accruing from this illicit trade. The leaders of these organizations are based in the U.S., and it is Americans who provide the cartels with weapons. The United States government's reluctance to address this issue is a point of concern, as highlighted by the Mexican president. Trump and Sheinbaum's exchange has been turning into a political fight, and it's like the U.S. is trying to make enemies of Mexico and Canada for no reason. But really, the U.S. is vital for Mexico. 80% of Mexican exports go to the U.S., and a lot of these exports are made by American companies. American companies that produce in Mexico export their products to their factories in the U.S. There are rumors that China also sells goods to the U.S. through Mexico, but the amount is unclear. If this dispute between the U.S. and Mexico intensifies, Mexico, the second largest economy in Latin America after Brazil, could be hit hard. If Mexican immigration to the U.S. decreases, hundreds of thousands of Mexicans could return to Mexico from the U.S., which could increase unemployment and social unrest in Mexico. If Mexico doesn't play along with the U.S., there could be street protests and political unrest. Even if things go well, Canada and Mexico are looking at a recession by the end of the year. Economists are saying that Mexican exports could drop by about 12% after a 25% tariff increase. If the 25% tariff continues for a full year, Mexico's gross domestic product could fall by between 3% and 5% in 2025. Mexico and Canada are preparing to retaliate against the U.S., but Trump says, if they retaliate, we will raise taxes even more. So Trump is basically saying, I put 25%, you put 25%, I'll put 30%. If you raise it, I'll raise it more. It's like he's wagering at a roulette table in Las Vegas, saying, I'm raising the stakes. This whole situation isn't good for anyone, especially those three countries: the U.S., Mexico, Canada, and of course China. If this keeps up, we can expect a slowdown in the global economy and trade. 2025 is shaping up to be a tough year. Thanks for watching.